are you all planning on doing crossings? You could chime in whenever. Do you have something on your schedule this year? How's things looking for you guys? Thumbs.
Happy to share. I haven't done any crossings, but I typically circumnavigate one of the barrier islands off the coast of Georgia
Awesome.
every year. And so they're not super long, like somewhere between 15 to 30 miles.
Okay, that's pretty long.
So yeah, that's what I typically am doing right now.
Cool, that's awesome. When do you usually do those?
Last year I did it in June. I was going to go on December 27th this year, but I could not fit the paddleboard and all the presents to the in-laws. So,
Okay, cool, awesome. We'll have to keep an eye out for it. And Dawn, I see you say thumbs up.
Yes, I'm a little shy actually, so I don't really want to
Sorry.
talk, but the next thing would be the Wild Buffalo Relay in an OC.
Awesome.
OC1,
Cool.
sorry, OC1 in a relay. Yeah.
Okay, very cool.
She can't join right now, but I'm glad we're recording this. So I was gonna record it on the phone, but
cool. Perfect. Yeah, and as we go along, if you guys have any questions or anything, obviously this is like a very broad topic because there's a lot that goes into these longer distance events, and a lot of detail that you could go into when it comes to each separate event. So as we go along, if there's questions pertaining to like some of the stuff that you have planning, you could always shoot it out there, or text it in a little chat message, although sometimes I don't see it pop up. Or you could always reach me later through email if you have any specific questions. So just so y'all know, don't be scared to speak up. So I guess we'll just kind of start, and if people pop in, they pop in. So basically today I kind of just wanted to talk about how to prepare for crossings or long distance events, or it doesn't have to necessarily be an ocean crossing type of event, but I know there are a lot of them out there. So, and I've done a lot of them myself personally, but a lot of these tips also apply to the longer endurance events just because of all the planning that goes into it. So that being said, one of the main things that go into these events, and that's one of the most important things, is planning and studying your route. So I'm sure many of you are familiar with some of the routes if you've done them before. So Fuller, like you said, maybe you've done it a couple times before, you might be familiar, but as we all know with paddleboarding, a lot of things change every single time you go out. So you're never going to have the same condition no matter what, right? So what I've always said for myself and for other people is, what are the conditions and what are the worst conditions that can happen? And how am I going to approach those specific conditions? So I always feel like if you're preparing for the worst, then everything else is going to be pretty easy-ish, kind of, hopefully, right? So I think that pulling out a map, understanding your currents, understanding your wind directions, a lot of these longer distance events like any ocean crossings, any roundings, there's a lot of currents that change, a lot of different wind directions that are going to switch up how things go, right? So when you're in that environment, if you understand when is the wind going to switch for this event? Is the wind going to come from this side if I'm doing a rounding at one point, and then later it's going to come from this side and I'm going to be in a headwind? Now you're going to know how to train yourself so that way later on you could take more of a headwind kind of approach, right? So maybe you won't go all out at first and you'll save some energy for later, or maybe you will go all out at first when conditions are ideal and then grind through it later depending on the distance, right? So understanding your environment and the conditions that you're gonna be faced with is number one. So you could train all you want for these, right? So you're gonna train, you're gonna plan your nutrition, you're gonna study your course, and then whatever's gonna happen is gonna happen. But as long as we know that we're prepared as we can be, then hopefully we'll have a smooth sail throughout that way. So planning and studying your route is number one as far as prepping for crossing tips. A lot of times people overlook this step. So if you've done crossings before, I know myself, so I've competed in Molokai to Oahu, Maui to Molokai, and my most, I guess, popular one was in 2018 where I crossed the Florida Straits, 115 miles from Cuba to Key West. It took me 27 hours and 48 minutes. So a lot of times we overlook this planning thing because we think, I'm just gonna go and whatever, paddle. and whatever the currents do, they do, or, maybe it's our first time and we're just like, whatever. I think my first big crossing was Molokai to Oahu, and I didn't study my route as much as I should have. I studied it a little bit, but I know I could have studied it more. And I actually had a hard time at the end because of the route that I chose. So that is the key part sometimes that is going to allow you to actually finish these longer distance events and crossings or roundings or whatever it might be, or even straightaways like the Chattajack. So definitely planning. So as far as understanding your pacing and speed kind of goes along with the planning when it comes for your route. So
Can I just ask a quick question, Victoria?
sure.
Yeah, I just wanted to know, you're talking about planning, and you said get a current map and understand how the wave behaves. Oh, sorry, my pictures. How where do you get that information from? Like, where do you get a current map? I mean, that's a pretty basic question maybe for some, but I don't know where you would get that information.
So a lot of times, well, it depends on the body of water. So like you'll be able to see, for an example, like the NOAA site will have a lot of it. I'm not sure for the inner, because you're going to do is like an inner water event, right? Like is it a river?
It's a Wild Buffalo Relay is from Catalina Island to Newport.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Okay, cool. So that's not inner, that's outer.
No.
Yeah. Okay. So yeah, check the NOAA site. A lot of times they'll have stuff. You could also Google, like wherever you're at, tide charts.
Tide charts.
And then kind of put in the area where you're close to or at. And a lot of times you'll be able to see the tide charts. So that'll allow you to see incoming and outgoing tides, seeing what currents run in that area, which I'm not familiar with that area out there, but a lot of times like different currents run through there and they'll collide with each other. So just knowing if the currents change, how do they change? Do they change simultaneously? Is there times where they run into each other and cause little eddies? Like, how does that all work? So I would just check into actually the names of the currents that are involved in that area, and then pay attention to your tides, because that's going to show you, obviously which direction things are going to move at certain times.
Is there a resource on how to interpret all that information?
Kind of, I guess. You could reach out to me. I don't know. What's that?
We can take it offline. Sure.
Yeah, I mean, as far as, what do you mean, like researching the information of that specific area, or just in general?
Yeah, like I'm not actually from California. I'm from Toronto.
Okay.
Area.
Okay. Yeah.
Going to California to race that race.
Yes.
I'm not used to reading the ocean. I'm not really used to reading it. I mean, I have done crossing. I've actually done Mount Molokai twice,
Okay. Mm-hmm.
but I haven't done this one.
Okay.
Different water for sure. So
yeah, I mean, I guess reaching
all the
out
things you're saying is very important. It makes sense. So
yeah, I would say like reaching out to the local knowledge there would probably be your best bet. Maybe the people have done it before that understand that body of water. If there are currents involved in that are named, you might be able to read about them a little bit. Like I know for my Cuba to Key West crossing, there's a couple of different currents within the Florida Straits and the Antilles current and stuff. So, but they're like known, they're on maps and you could see how they move. So if that area is like that, you might be able to see it on maps. If not, you can
your line, obviously, right? Is that what you're saying? That's going to affect your line.
Yeah, it'll affect your line. Yeah, your planned line. Yep. So sometimes you'll have to take a different route, right? So like, in Molokai to Oahu, same thing. For an example, when I paddled from Cuba to Key West, we started out and it's like almost looks like on the map like a straight north shot, but obviously once I get into the Florida Strait, the current, it's going to pull me up and more east. So I actually, based on the speed of the current at that day that we were going and that we assumed was going to happen at that certain time, I actually had to paddle a little more west in order to bring me, so when I was going north, I wouldn't overshoot my landing point, basically.
Interesting. Okay.
So, speed of the current, and you'll be able to see a lot of that up on the NOAA website and different sites that like that. And then local knowledge as far as like the actual names and stuff out there.
Okay, thank you.
So, yeah, no problem. Anybody else on that topic? No, good. So one really important thing as far as planning your route and really planning your training, I guess, is understanding your pacing and your speed. Um, a lot of times when we're paddling, we go from like doing these shorter distance races, like 5Ks, 10Ks, and now we're going to go and do these marathon type races, 20K or 20 miles, 30 miles and plus. So the training is going to be a lot different, right? And actually learning how to slow it down is key, because we have to be able to build a solid base before we enter these longer races, right? So if we're going out there and training, like we're going to be paddling a 5K, 10K, and just constantly doing speed work, you're not going to be able to understand your pace. And if you don't understand your pace, you're not going to know approximately how long is this going to take me? How do I have to eat? When am I going to get tired? Is there a certain strategy mentally that I have to take? So what is your current base? Do you know what your current base speed is? How long is that you can hold that base speed? So if I feel comfortable going at a 5 mile an hour pace average, how long can I hold that comfortably? Can I hold it for like a 10K? Yeah, sure, cool. Okay, when does that area become a switch? Is there a certain time where that 5 mile an hour pace starts to become harder? If there isn't, awesome, you have a solid 5 mile an hour base. If there is, and you want to aim for that 5 mile an hour base, how can you get there? And knowing that pacing speed will allow you to have a range of months that you're going to need to prepare for this event. So I bring that up because a lot of times these events come up and you're like, woohoo, I'm going to go sign up. And then it's like 3 months from now. And we have to be able to understand, like, can I paddle for, if I don't have a good X amount of speed, can I paddle for 15 hours? Is that going to actually work? If not, how can I get to that point? You know what I mean? So basically what I was talking about was pacing and just understanding where you're at when you first start. That's going to be key as far as how, like, learning how long you actually have to train to achieve your goal. And like I said, what I was getting on the verge of saying was, sometimes these races come up and we get really excited to join the races, but we want to make sure that we give ourselves ample amount of time to train for the event, so that way it's achievable. And also, we want to make sure that we go into these events so we can recover properly after and still continue to paddle for the rest of the year. So I see that a lot of times with people that are training, and they go into these long distance events with a not as solid base. Not saying that you have to fly through these events, but just having a solid, nice, steady base that you feel comfortable with for that certain amount of time. So they'll do these events and they're like cruising along, but then they get done and they're shot. The rest of the season shot. They recover terribly, and they have to wait a whole nother basically 6 months to a year to actually get their performance back. So it is really important, when you know that you're pushing your body really hard for these events, you want to be able to sustain that average pace and understand what that average pace is when you're planning your event, when you're planning your route, and you're planning the whole entire training program. So just understanding pacing and knowing that these longer distance events, sometimes you have to slow down, especially for your training in the beginning. Determining a goal speed is key. So what I was going to say is, determining a goal speed is key for your performance. Understanding like how long you're going to be on the water, so that way when you're training, you could practice at that pace, is going to be very important. And how do you determine a goal speed, right? You're like, well, how am I going to determine a goal speed? Like, how do you even do that? Well, for these longer endurance events, it's just really important to really dive into that base training and to see where you're really comfortable at, see where your heart rate level's at, and just seeing how long this approximate event is going to take. So if Fuller, you're paddling the rounding, and it's going to take you however many hours does it take you usually?
I would say it's around like 7 to 8 hours typically.
Okay. So like a solid amount of time. So you would look at it and say, I have 7 to 8 hours. can I hold this pace at 7 to 8 hours? How do I feel after 2 hours? How do I feel after 3 hours? Am I able to hold this now for 4 hours? What is a good goal speed for you is going to be key to allow you to finish that event at that pace that you want, but not, I don't want to say overachieve, because what happens in these events, right, is if I'm going to say, okay, I'm going to paddle from Cuba to Key West and I'm going to go 6.5 miles an hour the whole way. And as soon as I start to drop off, because obviously we know that's probably not doable, a 27-hour paddle, but I'm going to start to drop off. Now my mental game is going to get affected. Now I'm going to start slowing down. Things are going to happen. We know that in these longer endurance events, the mental game is a huge factor. So understanding where you want to be goal speed wise will help you with your pace, will help you bring up your. So if you're starting to train at a certain level, and if you give yourself enough time for that training, you're able to build your base some. Where are you going to be at the end will be your goal speed, basically. So I don't know if you guys have practiced with pacing at all for some of these longer endurance events, or if you just go out and just wing it. But understanding that pacing speed is a huge key factor, because it allows you to bring your pace up during the events and also bring them back during the events. So that way, if you feel yourself like, hey, I still have 10 hours left, I'm really excited right now and I'm feeling really good, I'm going to keep going. But wait a minute, like, I haven't trained at this pace for X amount of hours. Maybe I do need to dial it back some, because what happens is if you don't, you might get lucky and finish at an amazing speed. Awesome. But if you haven't been training for 6 months at that speed and your adrenaline's getting the best of you over a 12, 16-hour, however many hour period it takes you, that could really affect your performance and your overall finish. So it's just really important to understand your pace and how you feel during those few hours when you're training in that certain pace. So pacing and understanding your pace is another key point. Do you guys work with pacing at all? Does anybody work with practicing any of that as far as it goes with longer endurance events? Maybe not.
I've done some of that. My strategy lately has been, I have a Peloton. I do a lot of power zone training on the Peloton. So I've kind of know what my heartbeat is like around kind of a endurance type pace. And so that's how I've kind of taken it to the paddleboard, just
Awesome.
using my, trying to remember the name of the device, but it's like the device that goes on the paddleboard where you can see your stroke count and your
Hmm.
speed and your time and all that stuff. And so I've been tracking my heart rate just to make sure I don't get too excited and paddle too hard. And I
Yeah.
just kind of stay in an endurance zone is how I've been doing it lately,
Yeah, that's
as opposed to speed, just kind of trying to keep my body in a certain state of work.
right. Exactly. Yeah. Understanding exactly where you need to be with your heart rate. Are you in the aerobic zone? Are you in an anaerobic zone? How long can you hold that, which is your base? And just understanding when you need to pull it back and when you could speed it up some. Because these longer endurance events, they do play a huge, they do take a huge toll on your body and your performance. So if you're not fueling correctly, or even if you are fueling correctly, there's a lot that goes into them, a lot that happens out there during those hours. So sometimes when we really want to push hard, it's hard, right? You're like, I want to go so much faster right now, but I know I got to just keep cool, stick with my plan. Am I at a good mile an hour? When I was paddling from Cuba to Key West, about halfway through, I was trying to entertain myself, and I'm like, where are we? We aren't in the current yet. And I literally, probably for hours, and I feel bad for my crew, but I kept saying, what pace are we at? Hey, what pace are we at? What pace am I at? Because I wanted to make sure that the times where I was feeling really good, I was still keeping myself in check within that 1 mile an hour that I knew I needed to be. So, hey, you don't know what's going to happen after whatever X amount of hours, right? So I could feel great and be like, yeah, I'm hitting my 6 mile an hour pace for 10 hours. And then I still have 17 hours to go, but I'm going to keep doing this even though I know I shouldn't. You don't know what's going to happen 10 more hours down the line. But if you do know what pace you can hold that 20 hours at, you will know what's going to happen, right? Hopefully. So it's really important to keep yourself in check. And I'll talk about the mental game a little bit later, but yeah, just knowing your pacing and your speed is really, really important when it comes to these longer endurance events, for sure. Of course, they're races. So well, a lot of them are races. So like I know Dawn, yours is a race. So you're going to be wanting to push yourself a little bit harder, which means in your training, you're going to probably add a little bit more anaerobic activity with your base training. But for a lot of these other just personal events, like maybe your circumnavigation things, or like my crossing, my goal was just to finish, which even when you're racing, I guess is the goal. But challenging yourself without breaking yourself is the idea behind these, basically. So does anybody have anything on any of that? No, we're good. I don't want to skip over too much stuff. So anyway, the third thing that I was going to say as far as prepping for crossing is setting the correct time for your training programming to build a solid base, like I talked about, without overtraining, injury, and peaking at the correct time. So am I going to plan for a 30-mile event or a 40-mile event just coming off winter and have 3 weeks to do it? Probably not the greatest idea. You may be able to finish it, but I wouldn't recommend it, because we want to try to maximize, what we're doing and really have a good time out there and feel good afterwards, right? So I think that if we are all paddlers here, ideally, and this is just in a nutshell, but about 4 to 6 months, and maybe even longer sometimes, depending on the distance of your event and your current performance conditions, is a good amount of time to give yourself for some of these longer endurance events, especially if they're going to be held in different conditions that like in open water, because you're gonna have to like do a lot more conditioning to get your body used to being able to perform in those certain conditions, right? So people will do ocean, if that makes sense, right? People will do open ocean crossings, but maybe because we work or we have, kids or something else, we don't get in the ocean a lot. So giving yourself a little bit of extra time to train will give you those little extra few days that you need in the ocean in those conditions. So that way you can get out there and put yourself in real life scenarios and allow time for training for the unexpected, or going out in the chop, or experiencing side chop more than just once, right? So allowing yourself that little bit of time extra, even if it's just another month, sometimes can really, really do you some solid ways to hit your goals, basically. So I know sometimes it's hard, especially these days, because we don't know what events are happening and what events aren't happening. But if you have that long-term goal in mind, so just say you've always dreamed about doing whatever race it might be. We don't know when it is this year. Now's your time to build your base. If you could build a solid base right now, who knows where your base will be in 6 months from now. So when they do announce that race, or you do have that opportunity, now you have this really solid area to stand on, right? So maybe then a month from now, it won't seem so unrealistic to be like, I'm going to go and do that in a month. So now is the time when you're planning these to really, really work on your base. And that goes with any training program, but especially for you endurance athletes, keeping that base level, building that base level is really important when you have that goal distance event in mind. Real life scenarios are really important. I say that because I know a lot of times that people are in different areas that want to experience, for an example, ocean crossings, which is great. But it's really important to be able to get out there. Like if you live on lakes or other types of body of water, go out there when it's windy and choppy and messy. A lot of times, we underestimate the power of the ocean, even when we are on the ocean, and all the extra movements that's happening on your ankles and your knees and your toes are like gripping sometimes. So go out there in the lakes and all that in the rivers when it's the worst conditions, and still stay safe though, of course. But just put yourself in those scenarios so that way you're not going out a week before your event in these ocean conditions and like you're like, oh my gosh, like I've just been paddling on flat water. It's really important to put yourself in the environment at its worst, is what I feel. If you're going to go out there and you're going to side chopping all this mess, and then you go out for your long distance event and it's perfect and beautiful flat glass, you're going to be like, oh, give me an extra Oreo. But yeah, so get yourself out there, put yourself in those conditions, because that is a game changer 100%. Even for people who live on the ocean that want to do crossings like the Molokai to Oahu, for an example, that's a totally different ocean than it is in Florida, that's for sure. So ideally, you would be able to try to line yourself up with some downwinds if you can, right? So try to find, and that's goes to number one, the planning and studying your route. What are your conditions? Are these going to be downwind? Is it going to be side chop? Is it going to change like in your circumnavigation? Or for those of us who have done the Key West Classic, it's a circle. So a little bit will be great, then it's going to suck, then it's really going to suck, and then it might be a fun downwind. So where are you going to be in this area, and have you trained for all these conditions? Do your ankles know what to do? Are your knees going to ache? With that being said, for these endurance events, if you do expect it to be super long and awkward, it's important for you to bring the supportive gear that you might need. So if you're expecting a lot of chop and stuff, do you have anything you could wrap your knee with if you need it? Are you going to wear something for that if you need the extra support? Some people do, right? So just think ahead on what you might come or encounter when you're out there, and really just try to expect the worst, is what I try to say. So does anybody have any experience with any of that, or any kind of stories or anything fun with any of your experiences? Nope. Everybody's had nice flat crossings and beautiful weather. I'm jealous.
Well, I don't know if it's related, but I haven't done the Chattajack in several years. But last time I did the Chattajack, I trained for a certain speed, like to go a certain speed, and the conditions were horrible. Like it was just a headwind of like 20 miles an hour the whole race. And I just remember crying, like trying to quit, but like there not being a boat anywhere to quit. And so just like crying several times, like to get through that. So that's the only funny story I have about a really long paddleboard race.
Yeah.
But it was pretty brutal.
Yeah, exactly. So, and imagine if you put yourself in that situation a few extra times, maybe, you could practice a little bit of the the mental game, although you probably still cry because that sounds painful. But knowing what you're going to get yourself into, and we know that Chattajack race can be pretty brutal, that's for sure. Cold and windy, I've heard. I haven't done it, but now that people know, because I know the first couple years, maybe it was like, oh, we don't really know how it is yet, but then it just became like always like that. So now people are probably getting themselves in those situations at home when they can, just to try to like reenact it and what might happen, muscle memory, mental memory. So practicing your fueling methods is another huge factor in these longer endurance events. I don't know how many of you here do a lot of work with your fueling, your nutrition, and your hydration, but it's important to have a solid strategy in place when it comes to your nutrition. Yes, for most of these races, can you make it with just doing nothing? Probably. For these endurance events, maybe not. Probably not a great idea. And then for the ultra endurance event, no way, right? So having those proper fueling methods in place, how are you going to eat? What are you going to eat? When are you going to eat? When are you going to drink? What are you going to drink? All these questions, and also knowing that while you're training and you have your training program, you also need to have a fueling training. So practicing your eating. A lot of times we think, okay, I have goo gels and whatever, I have a banana and blah, blah, blah during my 10K, and it works fine. Totally cool. Well, after 6 hours, 7 hours, 8 hours, like, is that stuff still going to work for you? It might not. So understanding that you have to actually train to fuel is important, because if you're out there for the first time ever during your event trying new stuff, probably not a good idea, because once your stomach starts hurting, I don't know about you, but I cannot paddle if my stomach is hurting. Like, no way. I'll just be curled up. No, you can't do it, right? We use our core. It's our main muscle group that we're using when we're paddling the whole entire time. How in the world would we do that if our stomach's all in knots? We can't. So your digestion changes, your blood's starting to flow towards the muscles that you're using the most, which obviously in this case is most likely our legs. So it's taking it away from your GI system, and in turn you're gonna experience a little more stress on your GI system. So that can make digesting certain foods a little bit harder. Whether or not I mean, I wish I could eat, I don't know, pizza, but it didn't work for me. So I had to actually practice what I was going to eat for my crossing. I thought I'd be actually able to eat pizza. I did try it. I paddled one day for like 10 hours, and I stopped and sat on someone's dock and ate a piece of pizza. And I went to paddle again, and it wasn't happening. So that was off my list. So knowing what you're going to have. Can you eat goo gels for 8 to 10 hours? Maybe. Some people can. Can you have Tailwind or whatever supplement for your water? Maybe. Some people totally can. I like to eat solid foods, but you really have to put in place a fueling strategy for these events. How many carbohydrates are you going to eat per hour? How much is our body burning? The research, we don't have much research obviously on stand-up paddling. We are doing some, but research for bicyclists and runners, they typically have about 40 to 60 grams of carbs an hour. With the cyclists at the elite level, most likely 90 grams an hour. So we obviously know that we're probably around the 40 to 60 gram an hour carb range for what we need to produce the energy for paddling. So what does 40 to 60 grams an hour look like for the foods that you like to eat or that work for you? Those are the kind of things that you want to figure out. Do you have to have the 40 to 60 grams an hour in one sitting? No, you could split it up throughout the hour. So maybe you have a snack every half hour and then another snack every half hour, or you're sipping on your Tailwind and then you just have a little something every whatever. So just being able to plan out what you're going to have, when you're going to have it, and practicing that, it allows your body to really understand, like, okay, I can do this or I can't do this as far as absorption goes in your GI system. So the last thing you want to do is train really, really hard and put all this time in lifting and running and paddling and studying your route and doing all this stuff. And you go out there and you take a bite of a sandwich and then you puke and you're done, right? Like, what a waste. So make sure that you practice with food. Make some of your longer paddles, because you know you're going to be slowing down on those longer paddles anyways. Make them like a food training paddle. You know, bring out some certain things, make a list of your certain items, bring a couple of them out every hour, just try one and paddle right after and see how it feels. I know it sounds silly, but for these longer endurance events, especially being on the water, it's important. What I don't get seasick, but from what I heard from several people last year in the crossing from Bimini, it was choppy, which was the first for that event, but a lot of people wound up getting seasick. So even when you're practicing your fueling, if you expect to be in an ocean-like condition, maybe go out there when it's rough and eat something before, like right before, like literally eat whatever you're going to eat when you're paddling, and then go paddle, and see how it affects your body when you're actually paddling on choppy water. Because if it doesn't work, you still want to be able to get some sort of carbohydrate in, even if it's via liquid. But you don't want to find that out on race day or on crossing day or whatever it is that you're doing day. So fueling is definitely extremely, extremely important. For the longer, obviously carbohydrates are our main source of fuel when it comes to any kind of paddling. But for longer endurance events, our body does pull from protein and fat as well, just to give us that energy. So after about 2 or 3 hours or so, it's good to start incorporating a little more protein within your meals or food that you're having. Sometimes people will have, you don't have to have, it's not like you're gonna have a protein bar, but I mean, if you're gonna have like a peanut butter and jelly sandwich or something, if you're going for a 10-hour paddle, that would obviously have protein, carbs, and fats, right? So just kind of think about the different sources of fuel, but carbohydrates are your number one source of fuel that you are going to be using when you're paddling. So,
Sorry, did you say after 1 hour you want to start? I missed that part.
no, after about 2 or 3 hours is when nutrition changes a little bit.
I've
Or
actually been to it, and it
you mean
sounds.
just in general?
No. I just missed what you said, and it does sound like nutrition is very. I mean, I always try to look for the ideal, I guess, nutritional advice, and it seems like it's very. Everybody says it's very individual, and you got to experiment because everybody kind of reacts and has different needs. Is that correct? Is that what?
Yeah. Well, I mean, yeah, everybody reacts differently. Some people can't eat a solid piece of food at all. Their stomach can't handle it. Some people, they want to eat solid. Like I like to eat solid foods when I am doing these longer endurance events. But you're still getting carbohydrates in either one. So it really just depends on what you can handle, basically.
Okay, great.
Does anybody have any questions on fueling at all? Other than Don? I actually muted myself that time. Okay. So oh, go ahead.
So how did you fuel when you did? How long is that paddle from Cuba to Key West, and what did you actually eat on it?
Oh, I wish I had the slideshow. The paddle took 27 hours and 48 minutes. I ate almost 7,000 calories. Some of it was liquid, but a lot of it was food. And I had everything from pasta Alfredo, which was my favorite, to sandwiches, to cookies, to bananas, to the goo gel things, to little baby food packets.
Did you stay on your board, or would you get onto the support vessel when you would eat?
No, I stayed on the board the whole time.
Stayed on the board.
Yeah. So
it had to be challenging to eat pasta. What kind of paddleboard were you on? Was it like a very large board or like a 14 foot?
I was a 14 by 28 inch, 26 inch, 26 inch. But yeah, 14 by 26 was choppy, and the pasta Alfredo did not work. I only got to eat it once. But I came up with something to eat it again though. So I tried to eat it and pour it in my mouth with the bowl that they handed me. If you ever want to do it, put the pasta in a plastic bag and cut a hole at the bottom, and you could squeeze it in your mouth. So I didn't do that, but afterwards I thought, man, I could have done that, and that would have been great because that was my favorite. But yeah, didn't happen. So yeah, I had 7,000 calories. Oh, I thought somebody else clicked in. I had 7,000 calories. I pretty much planned to have about 350 to 450 an hour. Calories an hour. So it was super planned out as far as every half hour what I was going to have. And they just basically handed me what they already knew what I wanted, basically. So
what's that mileage from those two? Do you know off the top of your head?
It was 115 miles on my line. So
that's crazy.
It was pretty long. So pretty choppy. And but I paddle in the ocean, and I paddled when I trained. I made myself go out when it was really, really bad conditions and choppy and do a little bit of distance. It wasn't fun. And a lot of times, like, I was on the verge of crying some of the trainings, but I made myself get out there and just get out there and do it, and it helped. So Okay, so last year, really what I wanted to talk about was your mental game. So obviously, when it comes to any kind of racing, really, even if it's a 5K, mental game is huge. But for these longer endurance events, the mental game is I want to say like 80% of it, really. Um, we could prep and train and be in top physical shape, but once we lose our mind and we don't stay focused, it's done, right? Like we can talk ourselves out of a good situation if we wanted to. So understanding how your mentality is and just practicing good, whether you meditate or maybe you don't, maybe you just have some sort of release. It's really important to still incorporate that into your training. A lot of times when we're training for these events, so say you have like a 6 to 8 month training program set up for these big events. It's obviously you want to stay really focused, right? So sometimes we get like hyper focused, and that's great and all because we want to stay focused. But at the same time, it's really important that we obviously still have other stressors in our lives that whether or not we know it are stressors, but they are. So having that area for you to release during this training period is huge. Um, Huge. So for me, it was surfing. So there were some days where stuff was going down in my life. I was supposed to do something on my training plan. The waves were up, and I wanted to stick to my training plan, but I wound up surfing. I'm not saying I did it all the time, but it's really important to have that balance in your life when it comes to training for these endurance type of events, especially the really long ones. Um, but of course, still sticking with your training plan. I'm not saying like don't train on your plan, but it's just really important whether it be you want to go whatever to yoga, or you like to meditate, or you want to go, I don't know, rock climbing or running with your dog instead of going for a training run or something, whatever it might be. Having that release for yourself, knowing what it is, and then being able to go to it at certain points in your training plan is really, really, really important. Just being able to do that and then still bring yourself back to training the next day, it helps you kind of like reset but get back on. And so that's going to happen a lot of times in these events is you're going to experience a lot of different things mentally where you're going to have to reset and then get back on, and you're going to have to do it while you're actually trying to paddle. So just understanding that you have control of yourself mentally and putting yourself in these practices is really important, or I found very helpful as far as like being able to complete the event solidly in your mind, because once your mental game is gone, you're not going to finish, right? And you want to finish because you put all this hard work in here. You went out there, you planned your route, you understood your pacing, you planned out your nutrition, you trained for 6 to 8 months, you did all this work, and then you're like, I can't do this, I'm done. What? No, 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 no. So understanding our mental game and just really knowing how to relax in stressful situations and talking to yourself and making sure you know how to talk yourself through certain things is really important when it comes to these ultra endurance events. Obviously, there's only so much we can control when it comes to paddling. We're on a body of water that is constantly moving, regardless of where you're at, it's moving, right? So we can only do what we can do to prepare ourselves. We still have to deal with some of the unexpected. And that's kind of like part of the fun of it. That's like why we do it, right? Because we don't really know what we're gonna get. You know, that's why if we went out and paddled every time and we're just like, oh, it's the same every single time, we'll probably be bored like really quick. But we put ourselves out there in these weird situations, like paddling from different islands or circumnavigating different areas, and because we're like, what's gonna happen around that corner? You know, what are we gonna face now? And then the harder it is, like at the end, the more we're like, woohoo, that was great. But it was terrible, but it was great, you know? So just having control of your mind so you can face these challenges that we're not necessarily or expecting, I guess you could say. I don't want to say prepared for, we are prepared for them. But you want to face those challenges where you're like, all right, bring it on. Like, oh, side chop, let's go. Oh, headwind, okay, come on. Oh, 10-foot spell, let's go. Oh, wait a minute, and Eddie, I'm going backwards. Okay, no problem. So that's where we need to be mentally, so that way we can get through and feel really good about ourselves and just make it through. I know that a lot of times we put that part aside because we get really focused on our training, which is important. But it is really important to have that release in your training program, allowing yourself to actually enjoy some things still. And also, one big thing is understanding your why. Why are you doing this? Why did you choose to do X, Y, and Z? Because during those times where you're like struggling your hardest, being able to pull from that why, because sometimes just because I want to do it is not enough. So why are you doing it? So before you go into this, dig really deep and see, like, why am I doing this? And it could be, I want to challenge myself, the hardest I ever have, or I want to do this to prove whatever it might be, or I want to do it to show other people, young kids, that you can do anything, or whatever it is. Have a good solid why and understand why it is that you're doing it. Because when you go into those deep, dark places that sometimes you can be faced with, which I know all of us here who have paddled in any kind of headwind side chop stuff for like hours, there's like that place, you know what I mean? Where you're like, what? Like, I want to quit. Like, I just am done with this, so a lot of times we grit through, most of the time, hopefully. Sometimes we might quit. But if you have a solid why and you put all this time in, you pull from that why and you can finish it even when you don't think you can. So I know it helped me. I had my whys, and there was a deep, dark time, and it was actually really dark because it was nighttime, but where I had to sit there and remember my why, and I had pictures of it on my board. So that helped. But if it wasn't for that, I don't know. So mental game is huge when it comes to these ultra endurance events, and just making sure you add that release into your training program is a big help when it comes to just feeling good overall throughout the 6 to 8 months that you're going to be training. So yeah, so those are kind of like basic tips that I had, and I guess there's only like 5 of them. Obviously they can go way more in depth in each one, but did any of you have any questions or anything you wanted to add to any of that? No. I hope you guys learned something. Is there any topic that you wanted me to cover more?
I had a question.
Sure.
I don't know if you have any resources for this, but I'm doing the crossing for a cure from Bimini this year. And my support boat right now, the people that are on it, I guess you could say, like, aren't into paddling or fitness in general. No background to anything that would, I guess, involve anything like this. But is there any sort of reference out there or anything I could have them read to just help prepare them for what I'm going to go through when I'm on the board for that long?
As far as like you yourself, or?
Yeah, just, like I know what I'm kind of getting into, done endurance stuff before. But, I'm going to have a support boat there. So
Yeah.
just like, like maybe a marathoner's guide to, they can read, so they know, like, when I'm checking out mentally, how to get me back into it, or maybe a nutrition guide that they could read so they have an idea of what I should be doing. Just because when you're on the board, you're going to be far,
Yeah.
You're not like connected to them the whole time. And if they have no background in anything, if I need something, I don't know, trying to think of how to work, but that makes sense.
So, I mean, basically, like when I did my crossing, I had a support boat too. And I made it easy for them because I knew exactly what I needed, which is part of your plan, right? So if you literally give it to them how it's supposed to be, so if you're like, every half hour I have this, and like put it in a bag or something if you have to.
Yeah, label it.
You could write it out on a list. Every hour I need this, and you're gonna wear a watch. So maybe every half hour you go over to them, every hour. And then you could tell them, like, hey, can you check in on me every 2 hours and see how I'm feeling?
Gotcha.
So that way,
Yeah.
somebody, because you know, sometimes we want to like grit it out, but it helps sometimes for somebody to be like, hey, how are you feeling? And talk to them about how you want to be talked to, you know, because you're for you, it might be even harder because you're a guy. So a lot of times people don't want to like be too, you know, emotional or whatever it might be, you know, so tell them what you need, basically. You know, how do you get motivated during times where you're struggling? Be
Okay.
hard on me or whatever it is that you want. Like, hey, can you ask me every 2 hours? Do I need anything different? Basically.
Okay.
Um, I
That
think
helps.
communication is key too, because like I had music that they played while I had it on me at first, but that wasn't working out. So I put a loudspeaker on the boat, and like I would just have to communicate like when the music was bothering me or like to switch it up.
Yeah.
So like just communicate to them overly because they don't have a clue. You know what I mean? So
Okay. Okay. Yeah. And then my only other question, just because you've done the crossing and obviously we don't know what the weather is going to be like. Did you know of anyone that brought multiple boards, like in case like flat? I mean, I guess you'll know the weather. I'll know, you know, obviously the weather before I leave, hopefully. But anyone that brought like two different boards, maybe like a board for more flat water versus ocean, because I have multiple boards. But
you know what? I've never, I haven't heard from anybody that they've brought multiple boards, but I don't see why you couldn't.
gotcha.
I would probably say just try to get used to one board though.
Okay.
A little wider is obviously more comfortable.
Mhm. For
And
sure.
in those conditions, when you're more comfortable, sometimes you're faster, you know, than somebody who's not comfortable for that length. The one thing that I did do was I brought two different size paddles. I brought my shorter normal one, and I brought a longer paddle because I knew that eventually, if I had a problem with bending, the longer paddle would be easier for me to just stick in the water and keep going and not have to like bend so much.
Gotcha.
So I think, you know, maybe that's a better idea than two boards, just and it takes up less room anyway.
Okay. Yeah, for sure. Okay. Yeah, that helps. I appreciate it. I was just wondering. So
Yeah, no. I like questions. Questions are good.
thank you.
No problem. Good luck.
Thank you.
Awesome. So I'm excited that everybody's here. I hope you guys learned a little something. I know there's like a lot of topics to cover when it comes to this. And like I said, it's so individualized and so in depth that, you know, it can just, we can go on forever in each person's different scenario that you might experience. So if you do have any questions, feel free to reach out. I could just say that, you know, just being as prepared as you possibly can is key. We're on the water, it changes, so it's not like we can just go out for a quick run. There's a lot that goes into this with preparing, and it's what's going to make you achieve that goal or not. So definitely just be prepared and train as hard as you can, and then go out there and face the fun, basically. So, cool. Hey, thanks, Kristen.
Hey.
Thanks for joining. What's up?
Hey, this is Tim. Hey, Victoria. I just wanted to comment, maybe you should comment on your training program. Literally, I'm posting it as I'm listening to you. So maybe
Okay.
just give everybody a quick overview that that's going to be available if anybody's interested.
Yeah, so we have put together a 5-month training program it's specifically for the crossing from Bimini, crossing for the cure, which is in June, but it is going to be structured around a 5-month program. So if anybody is interested, you don't have to be doing the crossing. It comes with the paddle programming, strength programming, and a nutrition bit as well. So we are posting it now as we speak. So Tim says. And yeah, so that is available. It's a 5-month program that we're going to launch for them. It'll say crossing. What is it going to say, Tim? Crossing for the cure or? Yeah,
it says crossing for the cure, but as you said, right, it could be used for any crossing program. But
yeah,
it's going to be the main post here on the site as soon as I get done writing it.
Okay, cool. Yeah, so if you need any help with your training or whatever, I'm here for you. Obviously, I've done crossings, I've done long distance paddles, but I also have a PhD in human performance, and I'm a certified sports nutritionist. So I have both the education side and the athlete knowledge to help you out if you need help. And I really love ultra endurance and endurance events. So I'm here for you if you need me. It'll be fun. And yeah, that's it. So I love to hear your stories though. So if you've joined me here, or if you haven't and you're listening later, definitely reach out with some of your fun stories. I always like reading them. And yeah, I hopefully will work with some of you in the future. So thanks, guys. I think Tim, you got
Thank
any?
you for doing this.
Yeah, no problem. Thanks, Fuller. All right,
Good
guys.
here.
So we're gonna sign off, and I hope to hear from you guys soon.